so it is now 1:36 and we will open the July 9th, 2026 Board of Variance and Appeal, Maui County Board of Variance and Appeals. And I will start with roll call. Harry Hecht, let me know who you're with, where you are.
Here, I'm in my condo in Alameda with my wife.
Okay. Deborah Vial.
At home by myself.
Okay. I think Joe Wilson is MIA at the moment. So Allie Grimes.
Present in the conference room.
And Mihaela Stoops.
I'm at home and I am by myself.
Okay, so before we open, we get into our training session, we're going to open the lines up for public testimony. Do we have anybody waiting to testify? Nobody's in here. How about online?
I do not see anybody online or in person.
Okay, then I think we can move to agenda item A. Oh, okay, we will officially close public testimony, 1:37. Okay, public testimony is closed. Now we can move to agenda item orientation workshop. And I believe we're going to start with part 2, which is flood variances. It says Barry, but I think somebody's pinch hitting.
No, this is Barry.
Oh, okay.
I am on. Let me share my screen.
Oh, okay, sound like.
Yes, I am online. Hi, everybody. I am Barry Uyoka. I am the floodplain administrator for the county. And today I'm here to give you a brief overview of what the flood program is and what the BVA's role is in the flood program. So floods are the most common and costly natural disaster in the United States. Here on Maui, Lanai and Molokai, we all experience flooding from either coastal, river, or local flooding sources. So the Maui County's flood program's mission is to protect life and property from these natural flood disasters. To do this, the county participates in FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program. It is my job to make sure that the county is NFIP compliant so that residents have access to flood insurance and the county is eligible for federal disaster assistance. These are the two main points of why we participate in the flood program. As a condition of that, the county is required to enforce floodplain development regulations. So that means we need to regulate development and building in high flood risk areas and do so through the flood hazard ordinances, which have procedures and criteria for granting variances. So that's where the BVA comes in as part of the floodplain enforcement rules. FEMA maps out these flood hazard areas on their flood insurance rate map. So this basically says that this area is subject to a 100-year storm, which has a 1% chance of happening every year. So development in these areas are regulated through our flood regulations. So we can't just prohibit all development within these flood zones, as it could be considered a taking under the Fifth Amendment. So the NFIP has established criteria that more are performance-oriented standards that don't prohibit the development of flood zone, but allow it if certain performance standards are met. So what that means is if you want to build in a floodplain, your building needs to be anchored to prevent flotation. You must use materials and methods that minimize flood damage, and you must elevate your structure above the, the base flood elevation defined on the FEMA flood maps. So here you can see what that means to be elevated. The top picture there is showing Kihei. You can see that basically the lowest floor is elevated above flood levels so that the structure itself is protected. On the bottom, you can see a direct comparison of a building that has been elevated and a building that is not elevated. So the role of the BVA is to hear and decide requests for variances from the Maui County Code Chapter 16.29 flood hazard areas. So this is where the BVA comes in, is that an applicant may request variances from these regulations. And the general process would be, you would review an application, you would consider approval of that application. There is a criteria and conditions for you to be able to issue a variance. Once you've approved it, if you approve the variance, that gets recorded to the Bureau of Conveyance and as well as to FEMA. So the BVA responsibilities is to be knowledgeable about the rules and regulations. You must weigh the applicant's hardship and against the purpose of the flood regulations. You have the authority to grant permission for a variance to the flood regulations because of the special local situation. However, you must take caution when granting a variance because it does increase the risk to life and property, and such that flood variances are very rare in the county. When you get an application to review, as part of that application, you'll be provided a staff report that'll give the summary of a project seeking the flood variance. You'll be giving information about the applicable regulations for that. You'll be given criteria to evaluate that variance. FEMA has outlined specific criteria for the variances that must be met in order to allow a variance. The planning department staff will give you an analysis of those variance criteria, and then ultimately the BVA will have to come up with recommended conditions in order to prove that variance. Like I mentioned before, so the NFIP, the National Flood Insurance Program that we participate in, specifically has criteria or special criteria to allow variances. It must be good, have good and sufficient cause. It must have be a unique situation that compliance with the flood regulations would create an exceptional hardship. While this is not a blanket variance to all flood regulations, you can allow only some of the requirements to be waived and others to remain. And the project must be functionally dependent use, in which, for example, it needs to be near a water source or a flooding source for the hazard. So on Maui, there have been, I think, 5 variances approved. There are 2 in Lahaina Harbor, 1 in Paia, 1 in Kahului Harbor, and 1 in Lahaina Harbor. These variances are given to specific structures, so they're not, they're not given towards a whole area or an entire parcel. These variances are for a specific structure. So the variance that was issued for a structure in Lahaina Harbor is no longer valid because the building was destroyed in the wildfires. So if that was to rebuild, they would have to reapply for an additional variance because that variance stays with the structure itself in perpetuity. The reason this can be complicated and people would ask for a variance is that building along the coastline, in order to comply with regulations, a building must be elevated above the base flood elevation or BFE so that water can pass under it and minimize damage from coastal hazards. So typically particularly on the North Shore, there are really high base flood elevations. So in order to comply with flood regulations, a building along the coastline could potentially have to be elevated to basically the second story. And there can be nothing on ground level in order to comply with the flood regulations. Here's an example of the variances at Lahaina Harbor. These were the two, comfort station and the terminal buildings. So these are at ground level. The base flood elevations would require them to be elevated, but they obtain variances so that these structures could actually be at ground level. Comfort station that has a variance would be the comfort station at Baldwin Beach Park. I'm highlighting this one because the pavilion that's also nearby was damaged from coastal flooding. So you can see the pictures of the, structures that are near the water are subject to coastal wave action, and which can destroy them. The other variance that has been issued relatively recent is a Hawaiian cement facility at Kahului Harbor. This is just to give you a rough idea of the timeline these variances can take. For this project, they were seeking to put the cement facility in a high hazard coastal zone without elevating the structure itself. So the time frame for this, the application was filed in 2019. 2020, the BVA heard this. They approved the letter, or approved and issued an approval letter for it. The applicant then got a flood development permit as required. The building permit wasn't filed to 2023. And that's when for the final building permit, the review for that was to check that the conditions of the approval were met. So that took a little bit of time, and the building permit was finally issued this year. So when the BVA does approve a variance, your job would basically to come up with an approval letter that has conditions for the approval. So specifically that, the variance only applies to a specific building. The conditions could include required insurance coverage and or an effective date of when the approval would occur. I decided to point this particular case out also because in addition to the approval letter, there was also the, I think the staff report that had additional conditions that were not stated explicitly in the approval letter. So with the due diligence of the planning department, they did follow up, and we did make sure that all conditions were met in order to approve this. So the adopted report stated that the structure was supposed to withstand tsunami wave action. There would be flood-proofed, the building itself would be flood-proof with floodgates to reduce the debris that could damage the building. And they were to implement storm preparation procedures. So these items were contained within the report itself, but weren't put into the approval letter. So it took a little bit additional time so that we ensured that the floodgates that were supposed to be in the design and the storm preparation procedures were provided prior to approving that building permit. So all of this can come significantly after the BVA's approval. So we want to make sure that when you do come up with these conditions for approval, that they explicitly state all the requirements to make this effective. Another topic I wanted to just touch on is historic structures. The NFIP does have some exemptions for historic structures. They must be listed on a national, state, or local register, or be certified as contributing to the historical significance of a registered historic district. So for example, in Lahaina, there may be, so Lahaina itself has a historic district, and there may be some structures that are actually listed as a historic structure. So those structures would be exempt from NFIP compliance and compliance with all our flood regulations. So typically, BVA will not see these structures because there is a specific exemption for them. However, in the Lahaina Historic District, there are also non-contributing structures that they are located in the historic district, but are not a historic structure or building. So in which case, these structures must comply with flood regulations. However, it is possible for for someone to request a variance from that. So this is just to point out that there might be requests coming up for flood variances for Lahaina rebuilds. Overall, in summary, the role in the BVA's role in the flood program is basically to review the flood variances on a structure by structure basis. You have a preset procedures and criteria to evaluate approval. And you will have the resources of departments and or engineers or applicants, experts, in order to provide you information so that you can make the best informed decisions. And with that, I will take any questions.
I'm sorry. I just
No
got
worries.
looking something up.
Thank you. That was a great presentation. Question about the variances that you showed us around the island with the harbors. I just wanted to clarify. So is the understanding that the variance is for like the buildings, like the office or the comfort station in the harbor, not for the whole structure of the harbor itself?
That's correct. It was for that specific building.
And if I heard you correctly, it's on the building only. It's not pertinent to the land. Once the building's gone, there's no more variance. It needs to be reapplied.
Yes, that is correct.
I have another question. Can you explain in a little more depth, functionally dependent?
So that means it must be near the water. For example, the Malaya, the terminal facility, to offload passengers from the ferry. Terminal cannot be located away inland. It's, yes. The use requires, to be near water. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
And I guess I should mention also, this is just a brief overview. If you do have a flood variance application before you, I will come back and, you will be given a whole more in-depth review of the process and your requirements.
Maybe a more practical question. What is, how do you apply functionally dependent to the Hawaiian cement project in Kahului Harbor?
I think that was for the offload of materials.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions before we move on to the second portion of our, I'm assuming that was it. Barry, is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for Barry before we move on to number 2, facilitating summary minutes?
Yes, this is Mihaela Stoops. So thank you again for this very, very interesting information, and I'm grateful that you already offered to come back and present more information and support us in the event that there is an application for a variance. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. The variance applies only to the structure. If for some reason that structure is gone, and let's put it in practical terms, there is a structure that's been granted a variance in, I don't know, year 2010, the structure is destroyed due to whatever reason. If they're trying to rebuild on the same parcel, even the same structure, they would start the approval process or the variance approval process all over again, probably meeting current standards. Am I correct?
Correct. Yes.
So
Right. That's the example for the Lahaina Harbor facility. That structure was destroyed in the wildfires. And if that was to be rebuilt in any, if it was to be rebuilt again, they would have to come in for a flood variance for that.
do you have currently any applications for flood variances for either residential or commercial properties in Lahaina in the burn zone?
No, we don't have any variances right now. The reason I brought up the Lahaina district was specifically because I have been receiving questions about that. Some of the commercial properties are trying to find out what their flood requirements would be. And seeking a flood variance is an option for them. I'm not saying that, it would be up to you whether to approve or not approve.
Thank you.
We have one more question,
Yes.
please.
Yeah, quick question again. Back to Lahaina Harbor, does the state know that they need a new variance application? Just having dealt with them, it would be great if they knew that.
I'm not sure, but I do have a flood event permit in for the dock portion of that area.
Didn't burn,
So I think they would know. I mean, the state is the landowner there. So
I don't believe the comfort station burned anyway, as far as I know.
The comfort station didn't burn, but the new office did burn on the ferry dock.
Yeah.
mhm.
Something tells me that they would probably have somebody ask the question, because I understand that according to Dobor guys, their plans are already in motion to relocate back there one day.
I have a question about Eel Valley, because you showed a
Mhm.
picture of that. So like the people that, when we had that 500-year flood and the houses got wiped out, were they in flood zones, those ones that got wiped out, or were they in there with variances? Do you know?
The house that was washed out in this March event, they were actually not in a FEMA flood zone.
So now since we now have had the experience of that flood on the books, now does that create a situation where those people cannot rebuild in that same spot, or how is that working? Do you know?
I can only enforce flood regulations in a FEMA flood zone.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I actually don't have authority to regulate development in that area. What I am doing is trying to get FEMA to map out the Wailuku River and extend the flood zone up into the valley.
Okay.
Because FEMA is the one that approves and decides these flood zones. It's not. So.
Okay. Thanks.
Mhm. All right. Great questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And move on to item 2, facilitating summary minutes production. Not sure who's delivering that. Oh, Michelle's waving her hand.
Aloha, board members. This is your board secretary, Michelle McComber. I'm just going to go over a few of these items here. Let me just share my screen. Oh, here we go. Okay, there we go. All righty. Oops. Okay, so these are just some things that will help make sure that we have accurate summary minutes and verbatim minutes when we need to do transcripts for any of your meetings. We do conduct our meetings virtually with Teams, so we do have a video, but there are times where potentially that might not be the case. So coming into any meeting, just thinking that the video may not be available down the line is just a good mindset to have, so that you're not just expecting that what you're doing that we can see is going to be able to be recorded in the transcripts. If that makes sense. So, and also with the understanding that I may not be the one that is doing the minutes. So I can recognize your voices, but if somebody is filling in or helping out with that, they might not. So some of these things that we talk about will be relevant to that. So first of all, when we start the meeting, it's typically called to order by the chair, who will announce the date, the start time of the meeting, and the location of the meeting. We have also provided a digital clock here in the corner to make that nice and easy for you. It is the accurate time, so you don't have to second guess that. And then same thing at the end of the meeting, you'll just provide the time that the meeting is ending. As far as for recesses, that will also be announced by the chair. You can use the clock to say the actual start time of the recess. So it is currently 2:02 p.m. The Board of Variances and Appeals will be going to recess for 10 minutes and then announce what time we are expecting to return. So we expect to reconvene at 2:12 p.m., right? Then you go to your recess. When you return from recess, you do kind of the same. We are reconvening the meeting of the Board of Variances and Appeals. It is currently 2:12, and then you can go ahead and restart. For decorum, so a lot of this is Robert's rules items. Anytime that anyone is wanting to speak, whether you're asking questions or adding to anything, you should request to speak with the chair, announcing your name, so that, again, whoever is taking the minutes is aware of who is speaking and can provide an accurate account of what is happening. And then the chair will allow you to speak or not. I mean, they have the right to say no as well. And then you can go ahead with what you want to add. Whenever you are hoping to add or discuss, speak, whatever, please, if you can avoid speaking at the same time, which is known as crosstalk, that is very helpful for us. If we can't hear what both people are saying or can't determine who is saying it, that prevents us from having a truly accurate account of what happened, and we just want to avoid that as much as possible. And then the microphones are on when the light is green at the base and off when it is red. They are pretty sensitive, so just keep in mind that if you are having like discussion that you want to keep private or just kind of noting something to someone, make sure that your microphone is off, because that noise can get in the way of maybe somebody else that is talking in their microphone, and then that can also affect the accuracy of the recording. And we don't want something that you don't want everybody to hear to be caught on the recording as well, right? Let's see. And then for members online, if you can just keep yourself muted until you are ready to speak, and then go ahead and mute yourself again when you are done. That just prevents any background noise or like unintentional interruptions of the audio. And let's see. Okay, and then when the board is in deliberation and discussion, that is a time for the board only and their corporation counsel to discuss. It is not time for any of the parties or anybody else to join into that discussion or interrupt that. If that happens, any board member can address the chair and request a point of order. And then, you'll move forward as you need to, and let them know that they should not be part of that portion of the meeting. If they ask you if they can say something or ask a question or whatnot, it's up to the chair to decide whether he would like to approve that or not. Okay, and then when it comes to motions are usually pretty straightforward and clear and concise, but there are times that they can get a little elaborate if there's conditions or exceptions or something like that. So when you are stating your motion, it's very helpful if you can be very clear on that. And if it is something that is a little bit longer, the chair can then just restate the motion so that everybody is very clear on what it is that you're voting for, because we don't want you to not understand and then vote in a way that goes against how you would actually like to vote, right? And when you are voting, if you are doing a raised hand vote, especially if you are virtual, if you can make your movement very obvious so that we can see it. And also keep in mind that I'm not only looking at the people that are online, I'm also counting the votes of the people that are here in person. So just keep your hand raised until we affirm that we have everybody's vote. If there is anybody that is dissenting when majority of the people are voting yes on the item or on the motion, we just need to record that in the minutes verbally, so acknowledging who it is that is dissenting when the rest of the group is not. So that would be it for me. Let me know if you have any questions. Go ahead, Mihaela.
This is Mihaela Stoops. Not a question, just a suggestion in regards to making motions. Would it be possible that at the time somebody makes a motion, one of the staff members types up the motion and we can see it written on the screen, both by those in the room and those that are online? And this way, I think would be easier for people to understand the motion, also to discuss the motion, and also for you guys to take minutes of the exact verbiage of the motion. So just like you were sharing your screen right now, and we're looking at a Word document, we could, have the same Word document. One of the staff members would type up, motion to, I don't know, approve this and that. When it's a lot more complicated, when the verbiage is complicated, not for simple things.
Right. I typically am documenting what the motion is and trying to get it verbatim. So if you can keep that in mind whenever anybody is making a motion, speak slowly, clearly, so that we have time to get that written out. We can we can figure out a way to get it to everybody, whether it's me writing it down, giving it to the chair to present, or potentially using Teams chat. The chat is typically just for public testimony sign up. So I think that's something that we'll have to maybe talk about, and we'll get a good answer as far as how we can do that for you folks.
Yeah, I
But yeah,
don't know
I
if the chat function would serve us, but simply just like we're looking at your presentation here right now,
Mhm.
you know, we would display, it's a matter of displaying the text of the motion in a way that it's visual,
Mhm.
not only auditory. And some people, including myself, it's easier to process information when you can read it versus just hearing it. So it's a suggestion. If it is possible, that would be great. If not, we'll have to adapt.
Oh, do you have access to word processing?
Yeah.
Analysis? You do.
I can start a document for each meeting that I can use to just quickly type up whatever the motion is and then share it on the screen so everybody can see it.
Yep,
Mhm.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, the only thing you should keep in mind is that the public needs to be able to see the whole process. So it may be that you need to ensure that the type is, big enough for people who are remote to be able to see it. And then the only other comment I'd make is that some board members who have, especially when it comes to motions that have conditions, will actually write it out themselves so that they can read it into the record. And if they anticipate that to happen, they could provide Michelle with a copy of what they intend to read into the record so that everybody understands exactly what they're voting on.
Mhm.
Item 3, variances, and that would be the planning department. Who's okay? Oh, that's this portion of the.
Aloha, board members. You hear me? Aloha, board members. Is this Mike? Okay, thank you. My name is Paul Critchlow, one of the staff to the board. And today we'll give you an overview of the variance application process. So the slide you see here, the intent of this is to show some of the resources that are available to you. We have the rules and practices of the Board of Variance and Appeals, basically BVA rules. There is the Maui County Code, the different sections of the code that you may see a variance from. Deputy Corporation Counsel, this is assigned to the board members, Tom in this case, and the Roberts Rules of Order, which gives guidance and structure on how to generally conduct and participate in a public meeting. The board's authority to hear and make decisions on variance applications, it comes from the Maui County Charter. So what is a variance? It's a deviation from the code in its perpetuity. The approval of a variance is here, it's tied with the land, not with the owners. So property can be sold and bought, and that variance will live on in perpetuity with the land. Requests are related to standards of like a subdivision code, a building code, fire code, zoning code, and the request must meet the required criteria for a variance, which is typically outlined both in the Maui County Code and the BVA rules. As board members, you will see a few different types of variance application requests from the Maui County Code, such as from Title 12, streets, Title 16, buildings, Title 18, subdivisions, and typically the most common is Title 19, zoning. There are different participants in the variance request. you got the applicant, the department, the public, the board, counsel for the board, and the secretary and staff. So the applicant is the person who's requesting the variance from the Maui County Code. The applicant is 100% responsible for explaining why they meet the criteria. The department would be the agency responsible for the portion of the code that the applicant is requesting the variance from. Public, members of the public are allowed to participate through public testimony. Your role, the board, you get to decide, you're just the decision maker for the variance application request. Counsel, they will provide you with legal guidance. They can assist you with the procedures, the process, questions, and they can help advise with conditions that you may want to create. Secretary and staff, we process and route the applications to the board members, and we assist with the meeting setup and running a meeting like today. On this slide here, it covers the general process for a variance application with the board at the point that it gets to the board. So the very first thing is the review stage. The application and the director's report get transmitted before the meeting, and the board has a chance to review the application report. The second item here is the hearing itself, and this is when the board conducts the hearing with public testimony, and members determine if the required criteria are met. So at the public testimony at the hearing stage, you'll get to hear and review evidence related to the variance, such as the applicant's presentation, public testimony, and any other information presented that day. At this stage, board members are encouraged to ask the applicant questions for additional information to assist your decision-making. And the board has an option, if desired, to refer the variance application to more agencies or community organizations if you believe that's necessary. The board also votes on the matter at the hearing. When the board votes, it is necessary to clearly state the reasons if a variance application meets or does not meet each of the criteria for a variance application. This really helps the staff in writing and the decision in order. So the decision order will be drafted based on the board's vote. The board members will get a chance to review the proposed decision order, and the board will vote to approve the decision order at a later date. Then there's the compliance stage. In this stage here, staff will ensure that the applicant complies with any of the board's conditions for the variance, and it actually becomes effective. The variance becomes effective when the applicant has shown that they are in compliance with any conditions set by the board. So the board will vote on a day, but at a later point in time, when the conditions are shown to be complied with, that's when it actually becomes effective. There are three potential outcomes for a variance request. The board can deny the request if the required criteria are not met by the applicant. The board can defer the action to another meeting date to obtain additional information and documentation from the applicant to assist the board if the board wants additional information. And the board may approve the request if only if all of the required criteria are met. The approval can be made with or without conditions at the purview of the board. So, so now that we've covered basically an overview of the variance procedure, let's focus a little bit on the criteria for a variance. Depending on the title of the Maui County Code that the applicant is seeking a variance from, there will be different required criteria that the board must find. The criteria will be included in the application and the director's report that gets given to the board. The required criteria is different for each title of the Maui County Code. For the variances, all of the criteria must be met for the board to approve a variance request. and it's the owner's responsibility to provide evidence that they meet the criteria. As staff, we'd like to encourage the board members to read the variance application and the report that is provided to you, because these documents contain a substantial amount of information that can help you with your decision-making process on whether the applicant has met the criteria for an approval. Here are just some helpful tips in crafting conditions for an approval. The board may impose conditions necessary to ensure compliance with representations that are made and to prevent any detriment to public interest, health and safety, convenience, welfare. The report will typically include proposed conditions. When a condition is created, it's helpful to think of who, what, when, where, why, basic information. An example that is here is of a potential condition might be for health and safety, covering the why, that the applicant, that's the who, install fire sprinklers, that's the what, in the 2 existing 1,000 square foot storage buildings on the property, talking about where, and proof of installation must be submitted and approved by the Fire Bureau prior to the issuance of a building permit for the proposed restaurant. That's talking about when the condition would have to be complied with. That type of information really helps down the road in administering the condition, verifying it has been complied with. So this is brief. We understand that variances can be complex. Please always remember that there are numerous resources to assist you, like the Deputy Corporation Counsel here, the BVA rules, the application itself, which has a lot of information in it, the director's report. And want to say thank you for being here, for doing what you're doing, for having your patience to listen to the presentation here.
Questions I've got. Speed up. Is there any standard protocol who drafts the DNO? The applicant, whoever.
It can vary. Typically, it's been done by the staff, but it's often can be done by the party that wins the decision.
Okay.
It will usually end up being reviewed by Corporation Counsel, whoever drafts it, and then comes to you for your review and approval.
Seems like the last couple of months we approved. The applicant was in favor of the applicant. They drafted the DNO. I just want to make sure it's in the. Can we assign? We draft. Generally, they agree to do it.
Mhm.
Once you draft it.
You can assign. And whatever is in the recorded video and the words that are used in recommending approval, that's what's going to be used in the drafting and explaining why it was approved or denied. The director's report and recommendation can be a little bit different depending on if it's a Title 19 variance application processed by planning department or variance applications processed by other variance applications for other sections of the code. Typically, at least with Title 19 by the department will usually provide an analysis along with a recommendation and recommended conditions. If the board is happy with what's there as written, that could be adopted as a decision order, and there's usually language in there indicating that. If the board goes with something different, then we have to do a full DNO based on the revisions that were made.
Anybody else? Most of us have seen this and plan on seeing it again next year, but it's always helpful just to get, for variance season.
Chair, is your mic on? They said they're having a hard time hearing.
Oh, for good reason. Mic is not on. So anyway, like I said, most of us have seen this and prepared to see it again, but it's always good to be prepared for variance season. Anybody else? I believe that's the remainder of the agenda items. Michelle, I would like to see if you can tell me what's on the agenda for August 13th. Do we have an agenda yet? And do we have contested case, or is that Baskin?
August 13th, we have a status conference for Ruben Condo, the Stable Road projects. It's an appeal.
And that's it?
Yes. At
Okay.
this time, yes.
All right. Well, that's going to be on you, Harry. Anything else? Okay. Well, it's, let me look at the new, it's 2:24, and I will close the Board of Variance and Appeals. And 56 seconds. And